The magistrates of Athens summoned a man who could not account for how he earned his bread, for the law required every metic to demonstrate lawful means of support or face expulsion from the city. The court watched as a tall, gaunt man in his 50s was led in, his hands calloused, his tunic plain, and they asked him plainly who fed him and how. He answered that he drew water through the night for a gardener named Demetrios, and ground meal for a woman who sold flour in the agora. And when the court called these two before them as witnesses, the gardener and the flour seller came and confirmed it, and the judges, astonished, voted to award the man 10 minae from the public treasury in recognition of his industry. The man refused the money. His name was Cleanthes of Assos, and at that hour he was already the appointed successor of Zeno, head of the Stoa, the second scholarch of the school that would later produce Chrysippus, Panaetius, Posidonius, and, in time, the emperor whose journal you may have read. He drew water at night so that he might study philosophy by day. He had been doing so for 19 years. Let us begin where he began. The principle that organized the life of Cleanthes was not stated by him in any phrase that has survived intact, though the fragments we possess gesture toward it from every side. It is this: philosophy is not a discourse separable from the body that holds it. The mind that would think clearly about virtue must be housed in a frame that has known labor, that has been tired, that has carried weight from one place to another and felt the weight settle into the shoulders. The doctrine cannot be received from a cushion. It must be earned daily by the hands. We are told by Diogenes Laertius in his Lives of the Eminent Philosophers that Cleanthes was called by his fellow students the ass because he alone could bear the weight of Zeno's teaching. He accepted the name. He is reported to have said that he was indeed an ass, for only an ass could carry what Zeno laid upon him. The remark is not modest, it is precise. He understood that the capacity to receive a difficult doctrine is itself a kind of strength, and that this strength is not given but cultivated the way a beast of burden is conditioned by its loads. Consider what is meant here. The Stoics held that virtue is the only good, that externals are indifferent, that the wise man is sufficient unto himself for happiness. These are propositions that may be stated in a single afternoon. They may be memorized in a week. To live by them is the work of a life. And Cleanthes seems to have concluded very early that the gap between knowing a doctrine and being shaped by it could only be closed through the body's own discipline. The hands that drew water through the night were not interrupting his philosophy. They were his philosophy. We possess from him a hymn to Zeus, preserved by Stobaeus, which is among the most beautiful religious poems of antiquity. We possess fragments of his treatises on the gods, on pleasure, on the proper conduct of life. We possess testimonia from Cicero and from Seneca and from Plutarch, all of whom regarded him as a serious thinker, not a mere bridge between Zeno and Chrysippus, but the image that endured, the image that Diogenes preserves and that Seneca returns to in his letters to Lucilius, is the image of the man at the well in the dark. Seneca writes in the 44th letter that Cleanthes would not have been Cleanthes had he been ashamed of his hands. The line is worth pausing over. It does not say that Cleanthes would have starved without his labor, though that may also have been true. It says that the labor was constitutive. Remove it, and the philosopher disappears. Replace it with patronage, with comfort, with the quiet study that wealthy young men of Athens were free to pursue, and what remains is no longer Cleanthes. It is someone else, perhaps wiser by some measure, but not the man who carried the water. The principle, then, may be stated this way: the discipline of philosophy is not separable from the discipline of the body that pursues it, and the labor that sustains the philosopher is not a distraction from his work, but the soil in which his work grows. To remove the labor is to remove the philosophy. You may wish to set this against the image of the philosopher you carry in your mind. The image is usually of leisure, a man in robes in a colonnade, speaking, a woman at a desk, surrounded by books. The body is at rest while the mind moves. Cleanthes inverts this. The body works through the night so that the mind in the day may rise to its proper height. Now consider his circumstance. Cleanthes was born in Assos, a small city on the coast of the Troad, in what is now Western Turkey, sometime around the year 330 before the Common Era. He was the son, we are told, of a man named Phanius, of no recorded distinction. He came to Athens as a young man, and the sources agree on what he brought with him. He brought 4 drachmas. This was the entirety of his fortune. It was enough, perhaps, for a week of bread, no more. Before philosophy, he had been a boxer. The detail matters. He arrived in Athens with the body of an athlete and the savings of nearly no one, and he attached himself first, we are told, to the philosopher Crates the Cynic, and then to Zeno of Citium, who had established his school in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch on the northern edge of the agora. Zeno was himself a foreigner, a Phoenician from Cyprus, who had come to Athens after a shipwreck and remained for philosophy. The school that would come to bear the name of its colonnade was, in those first decades, a school of metics, of resident foreigners, of men who had no claim on the city's leisure. Cleanthes attended Zeno's lectures for 19 years. He attended them poor. The arrangement was this: by day, he listened in the Stoa. By night, he worked. He drew water for a gardener named Demetrios. He ground meal for a woman whose name some sources give as Demo. The labor was the labor of a slave or of the very poor, and it was performed under cover of darkness, because the days belonged to philosophy. We do not have to imagine the conditions to know they were severe. Athens, in the 3rd century before the Common Era, was a city in decline from its classical peak, though still rich in intellectual life, and the water that gardeners required for their plots had to be hauled by hand from public wells, in skins or in clay jars, through streets that were dark and uneven. To draw water through the night, in volume sufficient to earn a wage, is to work the shoulders and the back continuously for hours. To then grind meal, which is the rotation of a heavy stone against another stone, is to add to this the labor of the arms. To do both, night after night, for 19 years, while attending lectures by day, is a regimen that would break most bodies and most minds. It did not break Cleanthes. He was, we are told, of an unusually patient temperament, slow in speech, slow in thought, often the last in the school to grasp a difficult point. Zeno is said to have called him a writing tablet of hard wax, slow to receive an impression, but once impressed, slow to lose it. The other students mocked him for his slowness. He is reported to have replied that he was content to be slow, since what he learned, he kept. The trial we began with appears to have occurred when Cleanthes was already advanced in years, perhaps in his 50s, possibly while Zeno still lived, possibly after. The Athenian law required that resident foreigners demonstrate lawful livelihood. A neighbor or an enemy, we do not know which, denounced Cleanthes on the suspicion that no man could live as he lived, attending the Stoa all day and producing no visible income without some hidden and improper source of support. He was summoned. The witnesses were called. The gardener and the flower seller testified. The court, finding the testimony true and the labor honorable, voted him the 10 minae, and he, we are told, refused them, on the grounds that Zeno had forbidden his students to accept gifts. The refusal is the heart of the story. He did not refuse because he did not need the money. 10 minae would have purchased him years of leisure, of better food, of the comfort that his peers took for granted. He refused because to accept the money would have been to admit that the labor was a hardship to be relieved rather than a discipline to be continued. Zeno died, by most reckonings, around the year 262 before the Common Era. Cleanthes succeeded him as head of the school and held that position for 32 years until his own death around the year 230. He was by then in his late 80s or early 90s, and the manner of his death is reported by Diogenes Laertius in a passage that is worth quoting. Cleanthes, we are told, developed an inflammation of the gum, and his physicians ordered him to abstain from food for 2 days. After the 2 days had passed, he was sufficiently recovered that he might have resumed eating. He chose instead to continue the fast, saying that since he had already advanced so far upon the road, he would not turn back, and he died of starvation by his own deliberate choice, having taught philosophy for nearly 40 years. We are not asked to admire this death. We are asked to notice that it is consistent. The man who chose the harder path at the beginning chose the harder path at the end. The discipline did not relax with success. It did not relax with age. It did not relax when the school he led had become, after Zeno, the most influential philosophical school in the Greek world. Let us turn now to how the principle actually functioned in his life, what we can know of it from his writings and from those who reported on him. The hymn to Zeus, his longest surviving composition, opens with an address to the god as the one who governs all things by law and by reason, and it praises the order of the cosmos as something that the wise man comes to understand by aligning his own conduct with it. The poem is not abstract theology. It is a prayer composed by a man who had spent his nights carrying water, and the image of cosmic order that animates it has the weight of someone who had felt in his own shoulders what it means to bear a load through the dark for the sake of a larger purpose. The Stoics held that the cosmos itself was a kind of laboring god, sustaining all things through the activity of the divine fire. And Cleanthes is the philosopher who most fully developed this image. It is not difficult to see why. He had been, in his own small way, a sustainer. He had carried water for plants that would feed people. He had ground meal for bread that would be eaten. The work of the universe and the work of his hands shared a structure. There is a fragment preserved in the discourses of Epictetus, which is worth reading slowly. Epictetus quotes it as the final lines of a longer Stoic prayer that he himself recited and recommended to his students. The lines run, in the translation of George Long, "Lead me, O Zeus, and thou destiny, the way that I am bid by you to go. To follow, I am ready. If I choose not, I make myself a wretch, and still must follow." These lines are Cleanthes. Epictetus quotes them by name. They are the philosophical content of a life that learned, through manual labor, what it means to follow rather than to refuse. The man who draws water cannot argue with the water. He cannot reason it into rising by itself. He must take the jar to the well, lower it, raise it, carry it. The work is given. He follows, and in following, he learns the shape of consent, which is the inner shape of Stoic virtue. Consider how this differs from the philosophy we are often offered. We are often told that we have choices, that we may shape our days, that the discipline of the philosopher consists in selecting what is worthy and refusing what is base. Cleanthes does not deny this, but he adds to it something that the comfortable philosopher cannot add. He adds the experience of the body that has no choice, the body that must work because work is required. And he says that this experience, far from being beneath philosophy, is the ground on which philosophy stands. Seneca, who came 300 years later and lived in entirely different circumstances, returned to Cleanthes again and again in his letters. In the 44th letter to Lucilius, he writes that nobility of mind is open to all. We are all sprung from the same source. None is more noble than another, except those whose disposition is more upright. Cleanthes, he says, was a water carrier. Plato was not received by the Academy as a man of distinguished birth, but as a philosopher. These men became what they were not by lineage, but by labor. Seneca is, of course, writing from a position of immense wealth. The irony is not lost on the reader, and it was not lost on Seneca himself, who returned to the theme of his own wealth repeatedly and uneasily across the letters. But he understood and named clearly what Cleanthes had embodied. The philosopher is made by what he is willing to do with his hands when no one is watching. There is another report preserved in Diogenes that Cleanthes was once asked how a man might become rich. He answered, by being poor in desires. The line is the kind of line that gets carved on plaques in modern households, and it loses, in that translation, almost everything it meant in the mouth of the man who said it. Cleanthes was not offering a clever inversion. He was reporting a fact about his own life. He had been poor in possessions for 60 years, and he had been, in the only sense that mattered to him, wealthy throughout. The wealth consisted in the absence of unmet need. He needed bread. He earned bread. He needed shelter. He had shelter. He needed philosophy. He attended Zeno's lectures every day. Beyond these, he wanted nothing, and so he had everything. There is a story that one of his students, observing him drawing water at night, asked him why a man of his standing in the school should still perform such labor. Cleanthes is reported to have shown the student his hands and said, "Look, do you see how these have been made fit for philosophy?" The reply is recorded variously, and the exact wording is uncertain, but the substance is consistent across the sources. He believed that his hands had been shaped for the work of the mind by the work of the body. He did not separate the two. He could not have separated them without losing both. What then is the structural lesson? It is not that you, the listener, must draw water through the night. The historical particulars are not transferable. You may live in a city without wells. You may live in a body that cannot bear such loads. You may be confined to a desk by the nature of your work. The lesson is not in the form of the labor, but in its function. The function is this. Cleanthes understood that philosophy, taken seriously, is a transformation of the whole person, and that the whole person includes the body, and that the body learns its lessons through the doing of difficult and necessary things. The philosopher, who arranges his life so that he does no difficult and necessary thing, has, in Cleanthes' view, arranged himself out of philosophy. He may continue to speak the words. The words will no longer attach to anything. This is a harder doctrine than it appears. Let us sit with it for a moment. Most of us, when we approach philosophy, approach it as a kind of reading. We read the texts, we consider the arguments, we may discuss them with others, we may even attempt to apply them in the sense of trying, in difficult moments, to remember what the philosopher said and to act accordingly. Cleanthes would not have called this philosophy. He would have called it preparation for philosophy perhaps, or the study of philosophy, but not philosophy itself. Philosophy itself, for him, was what the body did when the mind was watching, day after day, year after year, in conditions that did not relax. The body carried the water, the mind watched it carrying. Over time, the two became a single agent, and that agent was the philosopher. This is why the refusal of the 10 minae matters so much in the tradition. The court offered him a way out. They offered him relief from the very labor that had marked him as suspect. He refused because to accept would have been to dissolve by his own hand the philosopher he had spent decades becoming. The labor was not a means to an end that once achieved could be set aside. It was the end. It was the philosopher. Consider what this means for any practice you may attempt to take up. The Stoics speak often of training, of ascesis, of the daily exercises by which the soul is shaped. We are inclined to hear these as preparatory exercises, as the warm-ups before the real performance. Cleanthes inverts this. The exercises are the performance. The performance is the life. There is nothing else, no further moment in which the trained soul gets to display its training in some grander arena. The drawing of water at night is not preparation for some greater philosophical act. It is the philosophical act. This has consequences for how one might think about one's own days. If philosophy is what the body does when the mind is watching, then every labor of the day is, potentially, philosophy. The cooking of a meal, the washing of a floor, the carrying of a child, the repair of a broken thing. None of these are beneath philosophy. None of these are interruptions of the contemplative life. They are, if attended to, the contemplative life itself. This is not a romanticization of labor. Cleanthes did not romanticize it. He found it tiring. He grew old under it. His hands, by the end, must have been ruined for any fine work. He performed the labor not because it was pleasant or symbolic, but because it was required, and because, in the requirement, he found the structure of his philosophy. The structure was this: something must be done. I am the one to do it. I will do it without complaint, without seeking relief, without requiring praise. In doing it, I will become someone for whom doing it is no longer a hardship. This is what the Stoics meant by the wise man's freedom from the passions. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the absorption of necessity into character, so that what was once felt as imposition is now felt as the natural shape of one's own life. The water that the young Cleanthes had to force himself to carry was by the end the water that he carried. There was no longer a self that resented the work and a will that overcame the resentment. There was only the carrying. This absorption cannot be talked into existence. It can only be lived into existence, and it can only be lived into existence by doing the labor, daily, until the labor has done its work on the one who performs it. Here is the lesson then, stated as plainly as it can be stated. If you wish to be shaped by philosophy, you must give philosophy something to shape. You must offer it a body that is doing difficult things, that is not arranged for comfort, that is not arranged for the appearance of wisdom, but for the practice of it. You must offer it the hours that you would otherwise spend in relief. You must offer it the labor that you would otherwise pay another to perform for you. You must offer it your hands. What the hands do is less important than the steadiness of the offering. Cleanthes drew water. Another might split wood. Another might cook for a household. Another might walk long distances on foot when conveyance would be available. The form does not matter. The persistence does. We end here, in the place where Cleanthes ended every night, walking home from the well as the sky began to lighten over the hills east of Athens, his shoulders aching, his mind already turning toward the lecture he would attend in a few hours' time. He did not consider himself a hero. He did not consider himself a saint. He considered himself a slow student of a difficult teacher, doing the work that was required to earn his place in the school. The school endured. His doctrine endured. The hymn he wrote to Zeus is still read, and the lines he composed about following the lead of destiny are still recited by those who try, in their own circumstances, to consent to what is given. He left behind no monument other than this. A man may carry water for 19 years and become, by the carrying, a philosopher whose words outlast the empire that ignored him. The question he leaves with you is not whether you can do what he did. The historical particulars, as we have said, are not transferable. The question is this: in your own life, what is the labor that you have arranged your way out of, and what would it cost you to take it up again? Not the labor that another could do as well, the labor that, in doing it yourself, would shape you. The labor that, in refusing it, has left you unshaped. You may find that you have no such labor, that the comforts of your circumstance are not avoidable, that the work of your hands has been thoroughly delegated to machines and to other hands and to systems that operate at a distance from your attention. This is worth noticing. It is not an accusation. It is a description of where you stand and where most of us stand, and it is the description from which any honest engagement with Cleanthes must begin. You may then find in the smallest of openings a place where labor could return, a meal you could prepare rather than purchase, a walk you could take rather than ride, a repair you could attempt rather than replace. The opening will not feel significant. It will feel trivial and slightly inconvenient, and not worth the effort. This feeling is the feeling Cleanthes overcame by repetition. He did not overcome it by argument. He overcame it by going to the well again and again and again until the going became the shape of his days. If you find such an opening, and if you enter it, you will not become Cleanthes. You will become, perhaps, slightly more your own, slightly less arranged by the convenience of others, slightly more present in the body that carries you through your days. This is not much. It is also not nothing. It is, in fact, where philosophy begins.